Good morning and welcome to Aikido's Heart of the Dojo podcast. Today, I am Andrew, your host, with my co host, Les Stevenson and Kara Stewart. And good to
Oh,
see you all today.
Morning.
How's everybody?
good
Morning.
morning. Good to see you as well.
Today's topic is going to be learning different Aikido styles. And is it possible to learn different styles, and what are some of the risks and benefits of doing that as we integrate that into our own Aikido? So that's our topic today. So let's get started. So what from each of your perspectives and a general level, what's how does this kind of concept hit you, and how does that what kind of thoughts does that evoke there? Maybe we'll start with you, Les Sensei.
Hmm. I would transfer over to Kara-san real quick.
Okay.
Looks like she's ready to go.
All right, let's kick this off. Different styles of Aikido. From a very macro perspective, in my training, I've seen that it's both a good thing to have to really develop your foundational knowledge of Aikido because it is such a complex, layered martial art. And then once you kind of have those foundations, to definitely go to seminars and explore different ways of training and techniques and weapons and that kind of thing. So it's kind of for me, it's kind of a both and.
Okay. Yeah. Good thought there, Kara.
Yeah, and I would say, mostly from my different styles and going to, seminars and so forth, it's just, one, it's you're building a foundation for friendships outside of your normal dojo. So you're able to, work with other people. And a lot of the times it's just with different cultures too. And, some people have, issues with that sometimes, or they have issues working outside of their dojo. But sometimes it's to find the time, right? I think everybody wants to go to every seminar you possibly can because it's pretty enlightening when you see different movements and you're like, wow, I've never seen that before.
Right.
Yeah.
I like watching videos because I'm like, wow, I mean, some of these videos I can't even capture what they're doing. They're so quick, and some of the ukemi that they do is pretty interesting. So I think you can learn a lot from going to the seminars and different styles. Everybody has their preference, of course, because that's why they stay with their dojo, and because it's comfortability. I mean, I think sometimes you need to be uncomfortable in some things in life, as well as when you're doing a martial art. So when you go to seminars per se or different dojos, then you don't know everything.
Mhm.
So, and if you can't take that in, then that's generally the people that don't do well in Aikido. They don't want to further learn the styles and stuff like that. In a nutshell, I guess I would say.
Yeah. I think we hit on some interesting points there, and I think the first thing that really I thought was a nice note was the community aspect, and that's the first
Yeah.
kind of thought that I was originally thinking this as from a technical point of view, but definitely 2 points of the community aspect is one, that we um, get to meet and learn each other's styles, and get to know the people in our both neighborhoods, and also our Aikido neighborhoods, and also in the world as well. So definitely that expands at a lot level, so we can learn different ideas and different approaches to other people's lessons. And then on top of that, like you mentioned too, that when we work together all the time, I know, we have, 10 people in your dojo or 50 people in dojo, like it's kind of like college or high school. Like, the more people you train with, the more you get to feel different people's Aikido. You get a different body sizes, different um, ways, like they take ukemi, ways they do throws. And sometimes there's some things that maybe spark some insights and thoughts into your own Aikido. So I thought that was a nice,
Mhm.
um, yeah, yeah. Yeah, that's a what do you both think about that? That's a really big benefit of I think like we've a little background for a long time we did testing with two or three other groups for a long time, and every test maybe 2 to 3 times a year we would all get together and um, do maybe a hour seminar, and then we would do testing afterwards, right? And
Mhm.
so being able to work out and um, multiple times a year with three or different dojos. What are the thoughts that you got out of that? I think that I got a lot out of that as well, but I just wanted to, that's kind of an interesting thread.
Yeah, I think there's so much to learn, and maybe not so much technique things for me personally, but more about how are they entering, how are they flowing, how's their zanshin, and just other things that I can take away from that as well. So I think that's a great point. And community, yes, that's a huge part. I remember my very first seminar as a white belt. I was probably practicing a year, and our mentor, she, in the locker room we were changing, and she said, I'm brand new, and she said, just, this is a great opportunity, and really reach out and work with the most advanced people you can. Don't be afraid of that. Just really enjoy this experience and get the most out of it. And I have taken that with me to every seminar since.
That's good advice. Yeah. What about your experiences over working with all those dojos and being able to work out with people that we don't normally work out with, and over the years? That's all.
Yeah, I mean, I like it. It's just sometimes hard to get together and so forth. So we say, but
The
I mean, I remember,
the amounts of
Yeah.
time, yeah. Hmm.
yeah, because everybody's a different martial artist, right? Everybody does things differently. So I mean, we all do the same technique per se, but it's how we do the technique. I mean, I remember my first seminar was with Yamada Sensei from the United States Aikido Federation, and I remember him talking about we don't do the little things good, kihon. We want to do all these special techniques and throw everybody 100 miles an hour, but we don't do the simple things like ukimi. We don't know how to roll. We don't know how to back roll. We don't know how to side roll. And when you can't develop something if you don't know the basics. And so that's kind of what I took from him is you have to know how to roll. You have to know also how to be not stiff. I mean, you can be a strong martial artist, but that's not the goal of Aikido. The Aikido is to blend with one another. And when you have one person going strong and the other person trying to flow, it's like water hitting a rock. It's just going to go, it's just going to splash everywhere all the time, which is interesting that, obviously he's well renowned. I mean, he's very, I don't know, he's very quiet too, but that's just something that he was watching everybody and he just said, basic things we don't do well. So obviously that was the point, to do the basic things better.
Yeah,
Right.
I'm just curious, during that seminar, did they kind of go into more, at least at that point, for a few different basics for a while, or was that just a point they made and then they went into more? Because again, that's a good point. Like at seminars, sometimes because we only get together, sometimes you only see these giant big moves all the time, and sometimes we don't do the basics. I was just curious, in that one, when they mentioned, did they go into some basics?
Yeah, so we were doing more Ushiro techniques that were a little bit more difficult and stuff, I would say, and especially at the time for me. And so he went to Taino Henko. It's just basically Kihon and then Kino Nagare. So just those two ones he went into. One to afterwards, he said to set the tone that, yes, you want to practice hard in Aikido, but if your uke is not willing to practice with you or vice versa, then you need to go back to basics and reconnect and recenter what you're doing. And maybe coming out of that, you will learn, that you have to work together. That was his point. So,
Yeah, that's really interesting. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I had a thought, Kara mentioned about, the advice you were given. And, I remember some of the bigger seminars. I remember when Saito Sensei came out to Denver, and I do remember, I think we were about 200 or 300 people at that time at that seminar, and so if you think about 200 or 300 people, right, like you can't get to everybody, but ultimately, when you're a younger gung ho person, you're gonna jam towards the middle and towards where the sensei is and where their highest level students are, because you want to, like, kind of to your point, Les, on too as well, that you want to learn from the people that know that style as much as possible, because that teacher is teaching a point and those people know those points, thus you're going to get a lot, and also they're at a higher level, and also at the other side too, they probably throw a little harder, and there's harder ukemi and stuff, so a lot
Right.
of times people avoid the center of doom or whatever you call it, but it was a lot of fun. So you would always rush towards the middle, and then you would find all the different senseis, or higher level people, and then you would get to really learn at a higher pace. It might be a higher pace of physicality as well, but definitely that was both of you had really good thoughts on that, kind of spurred some thoughts on how do you get the most at that time. But yeah, learning from different people, but high level people as well, but also once in a while it's good to, if it's a smaller seminars, try to get with everybody as well, beginners and
For
middle
sure.
as well. So yeah, so yeah, that kind of goes to the next point, but maybe does anybody have any other, maybe a few different examples of when you went to a seminar or trained at another dojo, and what are some of the good experiences you got from that, or experiences you got from that you can share with that?
I think I would have just one that was somewhat recent with Shaw Sensei's celebration is that we did was with the gentleman that came in. I don't remember his name, but he did the Tomiki style. And what was interesting about that was, I think at first because he was doing a lot of foot movements, and I find that really relative to teaching beginners, because when you teach beginners the foot movement of forward, sideways, backwards, stepping off, stepping in, that's what they do all the time. At least that's what I've noticed now from looking at some of the Tomiki style, is that's what their warm-up is. Part of it is the moving of the feet. And some of our new students, when we do that, it really helps, because then they understand the angles that they're supposed to take. And that's just from a warm-up. And, like our warm-ups that we do, other styles of Aikido that I've practiced, they don't really do any warm-ups like that.
No.
So I think it really helps with movement. It helps with absorption drills for your body, for the mats, what you have to, fall and stuff like that. So I think that's a good way of taking something from something else and then building on it. So
yeah, and I one thing I hit on that I think that was really important there is that warm-ups are a good way to integrate some new concepts into there, as long as they're not too funky, right, or too fancy. And I know that our warm-ups are very different than other people's warm-ups, and both from direct stretching, right, and then we have our ukemi, but then we also have our aikido exercises, our rowing exercises and tenkans, and we started adding a little bit into some hapogiri footwork movements, right? And then also, like you said, less sensei, the Tomiki style foot movements, right? The entering in and entering out, entering in, entering out, side, or the openings and the things like that. And I think the nice thing about that is those really break down the basic movements and just practicing it over and over and over, right? And it's kind of fun to do that. I would say, Kara, we don't do it that style, but the new kind of hapogiri type movements are another form of what Les is talking about, of those things. So that's a really good point, Les. Son, I like that. Are you guys doing a little bit more of those walking exercises? Do you guys play around with those a little bit?
yeah, we do. I mean, like Tom-san and Titus-san just but the other regular students like it too, because I mean, you can say all day, step off, step in, and it was like, huh, right? And you can show it, but you just practice it and make it more of a.
Right.
We make it more of a like a, not really a dance, but we try to pick up the speed and we try to stay the same, and it's pretty interesting watching people go across the mat quicker and stuff like that. And I think it helps the movement. So
It refines
It does.
those steps. Yeah.
yeah.
What about you, Cara?
Mhm.
About movements and or sorry about some examples or
Yeah,
remembrances.
absolutely. I have two, one very recent and one a few years ago. The one a few years ago was with Pat Hendrick Sensei and Stan Pranin Sensei in Las Vegas, and 2013, long time ago. But something I really took from that, again, working with so many different people from more of an Awama style. But the thing I took away from that, the biggest thing was that Pranin Sensei talked about the danger zone when you're an uke, actually when you're a nage, and you're being attacked, and you can be in front of them, which is the danger zone, or you can be in the safe zone, which is off the line. And we talk in our dojo about being off the line so much, like don't just attack and stand there, but get off the line. And I've taken that idea since 2013 into my Aikido as best as I can. And I'll just never forget his examples of that. And then Hendrik Sensei's role modeling for me. I was Uchideshi for her twice. Hope to go again. But she's pretty small. She's probably about my height, and she's so strong and so martial that she's always been a role model for me too. So watching her as well, working with these black belts and really showing her Aikido, again, reinforced in me, like I don't have to be 6'2". I can do beautiful martial strong Aikido and still be me. So definitely I took some things away from that. And then the most recent one was a seminar in Colorado with 4 different senseis. It was a fundraiser for Ukraine. And the joy of that was 4 very different styles. And just going in with that mindset of like, I can't know these styles, so I'm just going to have fun and do the best I can and do what they're showing and get what I can. And like you said, Les Sensei, that community, I met so many more new people from different dojos and all that. So yeah, that was a really fun day, really challenging, like 5 hours of Aikido. There weren't many of us left on the mat at the last class, but it was really good exploration of very different styles. And just, will I bring that into my Aikido? Probably not, but just opening my mind to what other styles do and why. It was wonderful.
Nice.
Yeah, and you hit on a really nice point about they're taking you can learn a lot of Aikido other than techniques. And
Yes.
so, like, you said about Stan Prentice Sensei and Hendrik Sensei, that seminar sounded, I wasn't there, but it sounded like about martialness and awareness of your, where you enter and, keeping your hands up and those types of things. I do think, depending on your style, of course, but a lot of the times it really can spark, those, keeping things that we don't normally talk about, maybe, or we do, but maybe in a different perspective. So you say, oh, I really learned some Mai or distancing this time because we did this exercise, and we can play around with that. Those are types of things I think are amazingly great things to bring back and really take into there. And I think one thing that spurred in my mind too was that sometimes people do have different levels of martialness. And I would say that, our style Kido is, fairly high on the martial scale, from that perspective. But sometimes, you maybe there are some people, we do like Shomanuchi, and maybe we come down in here, but sometimes they come in like a punch, and you're like, you got to be aware and you got to be ready that anytime, any place, you don't know these people, we don't know what they're doing and how they grab and how they fall and all this kind of stuff. It really helps you bring that awareness and that self martialness, and on both sides. And like you said, Kara and San, about the seminar, there might be other styles that are on the other side of that, where they're more flowy and maybe they're teaching other concepts. So definitely some good things there. Did you have anything to add on what Kara said? on?
No, it's just interesting that, obviously everybody's different. Everybody has different perspective, and that's why it's kind of, cool that when you go to those different things and you try to bring it into your dojo a little bit, right? It's like that's why you went. And
Right.
some things are applicable, some are not, but I think it's always interesting to bring different movements in. They do the Gen Aikido and stuff, so it's kind of interesting to see the Iwama style and also the difference between Hambu style of the way they do their techniques. And say the strongest ones I've seen are the women senseis. There's just their movements are so quick, right? But they're fluid, right? And they're hard to sometimes the techniques are hard to grasp. So I think it's cool whenever you can, look at all those different things and then try to put it into your practice. So.
Right. Especially from video, I think it's hard to see sometimes. That's why going as much as possible when you can, of course, and feeling that, and I had a few experiences to add. First was we'll go into these deep someday, but when I went to Japan to train and a different way of thinking about martialness, and I went to many places, but the two kind of one trip I went to Akita with Kawabe Sensei, and very Iwama focused, very strong Aikido, and then went to Iwama right after that for a short period, and again it was so intense and so deep. I think that didn't affect me in the sense that I think our style at the time was very similar, so that wasn't as cultural shock, but more of the culture and the focus of training was a new level that really helped me both refocus my training and also really understand that you can bring up the level even more, and it really helped kind of set the stage for future years. But then a different perspective, and again, not going too much into that, but then I would say kind of the Aikido Summit perspective, or like you said, Kara, about the four different senseis, but and Les-san mentioned, Tamiki style, and so you get those seminars where you get access and get to meet 4 or 5 different senseis and maybe short classes, but try different things and feel and we talked about this before, but how do you feel the techniques from their high level students as well? If you can get a ukemi from the actual sensei, that's great too, but really feel what they're talking about and try it. And again, you're not going to master this, you're not going to learn everything, but you can say, oh, I get the concept that they're trying to do, and maybe that there are some applicable things that we can do in our own Aikido. And then I would say another thing that we had access to a lot was I remember a seminar with Ito Sensei from Boston and Keizawa Sensei, and their style is very different, and big flowy and big strong hip movements and pull, and Ito Sensei likes those elbow things, and you're like, wow, like, oh, it's really fun. So it's a lot of fun, but also that's very different than our style, very different, right? Especially like the knee drops and the go with the pull down. And again, it's fun to try it, and over 10 seminars you start to say, okay, maybe I can start to do this knee drop turn thing, and but I think there's so much to learn from those things. But on the other side too, I can't imagine trying to master that if I don't go to that school. Those But we can learn some of the concepts and the ideas and the hip power and things like that. So those are 3 different ideas for me. Anything to follow up on and this last topic, or you want to move on?
No, I'm good.
Yeah. Yeah. And then, so I guess the kind of the opposite side of this is like, what can be some of the pitfalls of training and going to other seminars, or it's kind of the thought here, and maybe the question to spur some thought here is that, for example, I remember when I started doing learning Japanese, and at the same time, I was gung ho and I started taking Spanish at the same time. And so in my dreams, or when I started talking, I would say something, uh, you know, uh, today is, and then I would say, half Japanese, half Spanish, and I would be confused. So I had to pick one, and I'm like, okay, I'm dropping, Spanish, and I'm going to continue with Japanese. But another example is, when I was in Aikido for more than, at that point, maybe 15, 20 years, that I then took Kendo and Iaido, and I felt like it was a plus. But I could see that if you're a beginner and taking another martial art at the same time, that potentially could be confusing, and I think you can do it, but I think it could be confusing if you're a beginner in both. And how do you less sensei we talk about all the time, like hard to get people to come to class, and as it is, and you want to be able to people to really focus in and be there for your own style in the beginning, especially to really be able to learn and your foundational principles. But what are some of the pitfalls you've seen? I have some other thoughts on this one because I've seen some other interesting things. But does anybody have any thoughts on either you see people that go to seminars a lot, or maybe you go to a seminar and you try to bring it back? People bring stuff back, and then um, they're trying to change maybe techniques at the dojo, and say, hey, we've done this, and the teacher's saying, hey, wait, uh, we need to be doing it our style this when we're here. But any thoughts on that?
Well, I would only say that it's interesting when you introduce as a sensei or whatever, when you introduce a new technique that they haven't seen. Now, I'm not talking about like Nushiro or Shumunuchi and stuff like that. It's just that you do a different angle of maybe katatedori and you're doing kaiti nage, and of course there's you have uchi and soto, and you now introduce a different way of doing it on the outside, and they look at you, right? They're like, we generally on the uchi tenkan, you usually go down and you touch the ground and then you throw. And another way, if you just introduce another way, they're just like totally confused, right? Like, well that's generally not what we do. And it's like, well, this is this is Aikido. You haven't seen every technique, possible. And it's just kind of interesting. Even if you introduce something new in the warm-up, I think that sometimes that's good because people get stale, or they get it's like if you're doing punching all the time, you know what I'm saying, and you're blocking more because the punches are all going over here because they're accustomed to being blocked every time.
Yeah.
Or they're punching in your hand instead of your face, right? It's like, no, my face is over here, my hand's clear over here.
Right.
So I think sometimes when you introduce new stuff, it gets difficult for some students. So I mean, I really don't have a problem if you want to try new ukimi that you learned in a seminar and stuff like that. But I think sometimes as a sensei, though, if you introduce stuff like that and it takes them out of the norm, it's difficult for the student, especially if they've been around a while.
So you're saying that makes sure I think what I hear is that it is good once in a while to introduce those things, but if you do it all the time, one, you can't get them to learn the techniques that you need them to learn for your your foundational principles. But also it is good once in a while to throw in some things to kind of keep the freshness, both from a this is interesting perspective, and also from a we actually do some of these techniques, and let's have another, like a cube. Now let's look at the cube from a different side, and this is still Aikido. And I think that's a good point. So you're saying it's on both sides, it's important, but too much of one or the other, I think is not good, right? It's kind of a balance, maybe.
Yeah, because I think sometimes, just taking the kaitanagi, they think that you always have to touch the ground, and you don't, right? I mean, there's some techniques that you're just, going from, your center, and you're doing the kaitanagi from there. I mean, you see that quite a bit, and then you introduce that, and they're still going to the ground, and all you have to do is push them, and they'll fall down. It's like, well, that's not the technique we're doing. And so I think you get in a rhythm of this. These are just the techniques that we do, and sometimes I think you can get stale by not doing it in a martial way, right? You don't want to do it in a martial way every time, because I think your head would explode, right? Doing a ki every time, right? Or having that intensity every throw and stuff. Yeah, I just think that when you introduce that stuff, and if you introduce too much of it, and I think that's why a lot of people, when I see at seminars, they only stay for the morning or they only stay for the evening. It's because they're like, it's just too much stuff. It's not the way I mean, that's kind of what you hear when people are chatting. Well, we don't do it this way. Well, we don't do it that way. So, and then you're looking for them and they're gone. It's like, they don't want to, either they're uncomfortable or they're like, yeah, I can't really benefit from this. And they leave. So, I mean, that's just what I see most of the time. So.
Yeah, no, yeah. And it kind of brings back to like, why I really enjoy, and I think it's beneficial, from different perspectives. I got a bird outside there. It's pretty exciting. When I come out to Colorado, as I don't get out there, 2 to 3 times a year, but I'm teaching the same things that you teach, but again, but I might be saying it in a different way that they don't hear me all the time. And I'm saying the same thing that you're saying. And they're like, that's different than and you're like, no, that's exactly what I've been saying, like, or whatever. So, but they're hearing it.
Well, somewhat, right? I mean, yeah, I mean, I don't teach the way you teach, because obviously you're up here and I'm down here. So it's kind of like, they see that. I mean, I just see the different, the distance, you know what I'm saying? Yeah, I teach it this way, but when you come out, it's different. So that's why they're like, it's different only because, it's more technical, I think, sometimes. And people sometimes don't like technical. It's just so weird, right? They would rather do things sloppy and just bleh, instead of getting so technical with something. It's like, oh, you need to move your hand here. Well, I've been doing it this way and it works. Well, that doesn't mean it's going to work.
Right.
Yeah,
that's a good point. And also, and those habits that like you said, I really like that one where we're doing a movement and you put your hand up to block the hand and they punch the hand versus punch your face, because I'm getting ready to do that. Those habits that we get into, and
so it's better to teach them to slap it away, right? Instead of putting your hand up. It's better to teach them, just little things like that. Like you slap the punch away. You don't put your hand up, right? So when I'm punching you, I better get ready for my arm to go the other direction, because you're slapping it. You're just not doing this. You're going, yeah, things like that. Where sometimes people don't want to learn from other people because, well, we don't slap like that. That's what you should be doing. You shouldn't be just putting your hand up.
When something's coming towards your face, you
do something.
Get out of the way. Get out of the way, or redirect.
Right.
It reminds me of a fun story when Kara Sensei was early in her career. Do you remember that story about your talking with Les Sensei about that's not the way we do this technique or whatever?
No, this is so relevant. So early on, and I'm very much the Lisa Simpson of Aikido. Like, I learn things, I take them in, I study them, and I like progression and getting better and all that stuff. So I'm very much that way as a student of everything. So early on in my career, in my Aikido, we were doing, I don't know what technique it was, but I had learned it this way as the way we do it. And then we started changing it like we do in Aikido. Things are not always like etched in stone with tablets from the gods. They change. They kind of, and either it was my perception of that technique that was wrong, but I thought it was the way we do it, or we did change it a little bit. But I was like, that's not how we do this. And I was just so flummoxed for a little while, like, this isn't right. This isn't the Kiru way. And then I realized, like, actually it is. It's Aikido. We do evolve and we do grow. And the best thing for me as a student is to go, all right, this is how we're doing this.
Yeah. And I
And
think
not
we
get
all
so
had a
wrapped up into
conversation
that.
that one near that time, and
Mhm.
we were actually talking through that technique, and me and Les were talking through that technique, and it was like, yeah, we did that. We do it that way, and we do it this way, and we do it this way. And Kara saw
Mhm.
these three things, but we also, less sensei, maybe in the Nippon Kan years or whatever, we did it this way or we did it this way.
Mhm.
Like there's so much of breadth of Aikido, and that kind of goes
Right.
to, it's a good learning experience for you as well as all of us. Like
Mhm.
maybe sometimes we do need to not change our Aikido, of course, but um, add some variety to, pull out more of things that we don't always do once in a while to keep our brains fresh and the students
Yeah.
um, understanding that these are the same principles. We're using the same footwork, my hands in the same place, but we're executing these in a different style. Yeah.
Yes. Uh-huh. Yeah. Something I've noticed and have explored over the years is I mean, I think it's very important to have your foundational Aikido, the thing that you practice, and it's the same. Your EQ is the same, it'll change every technique, but it's the same principles, knee down first, just all those same things with our basic foundational Aikido. I think that's important to really get that and have that in your body and in your muscle memory. And then I know sometimes when I teach, I will do something we always do, but like you said, lessons, I do a different angle or do a different something and see if people are paying attention to that little change. And oftentimes not. And I know I'm probably guilty of the same thing. Like, oh, that's what we do, and I'll do this. But then you stop the class, the next showing of the technique, like, actually, we're stepping off the line this direction. So let's try that. Like, oh, because it is so easy for our brains to just default to what we know and what we're comfortable with. And like you said, Lasan, there's little opportunity for growth in that comfort level. It's just static and you just do it because that's what you've always done. But there's so much more to Aikido than that.
Yeah. And just to real quick go back on the original kind of thread, and I really like this thread we've been going down, was that, what are some of the pitfalls? And I think we talked about balance between the pitfalls of those and good stories between the two. And I would just say one of the thoughts, and the reason why I brought up pitfalls is training different styles of Aikido too, is that I always said if you don't have the ability to um, continue to focus on very detailed technical stuff that you don't have access to, um, I think could be a dangerous path depending on your level, of course. And I've been to some dojos that um, the maybe they have a high level of teacher base or a high level of student base, and then so they might go out to different seminars, and especially sometimes as teachers, sometimes they're looking for new ways to explore Aikido, sometimes different ways. And so they would come back from seminars and then they would say, okay, we're going to practice this way that was very different than the way they've been training. And then they kind of lose their focus as a group, and then the students are like, well, do we do it this way or do we do it this way?
Mm-hmm.
Like
Yeah.
maybe I'm a, less son mentioned or kind of highlighted that, I'm very, we do it this way, we here's how we do it, and try to be consistent as much as I can
Mm-hmm.
be, more from a perspective of there's so much of a breadth of Aikido. There's so much there that we could be doing this for the next 10 years, and we have plenty of material to work from, right? And so it's just
Mm-hmm.
those foundational principles that we can do. And I agree, like we can add in things like different foot movements and different hapogiris and different weapons type things to kind of integrate some of that stuff. But we do certain things. We got to be able to do the basics first before we can, of our own style, I'm saying. And so I think that can sometimes confuse the lower level students
Mm-hmm.
or confuse the students sometimes because they're not sure I think you kind of hit on that earlier too, Les Sensei, right? And about there's potential to confuse the beginner students a little bit if you don't have some sort of program, I guess you'd call it. I guess I don't know the word, but
Well, some of the ones that keep their manuals, if you will. I mean, you can see them go over. Where's this in the manual? Well, it's something we're doing new today, right? It's like, I mean, I think it's okay to keep uniformity and all that other type of stuff, but then sometimes just do one technique they've never seen, and when you tell them it's to work on your okimi, it's to work on your following of the nage and stuff like that, then they're okay with it. But it's just interesting to see that if you stray off a different path,
oh my gosh, yeah,
everybody's like, oh.
Yeah, and that's why it's a good thing to do. Yeah, I agree. Yeah.
Yeah, you like watch some of the senseis, they do these cool techniques, and you're like, oh, those are neat. Well, we would never do those in our dojo. Like, well, why not? I mean, you have to stick with what you're going to test to, but why not try it, right? Usually because we're no good at it, or we haven't done it enough, so we don't like it, right? So we kind of discount it and say, we're not going to do that. It was fun to learn it today, but we'll never do that.
Yeah, and try it on maybe an open practice or a time when we have time to practice. That's what I was saying. For example, like when we learn those big hip movements and the knee drops stuff from like Kanai Sensei type stuff, like from Izawa Sensei or Ito Sensei, like we could probably try some of those in class once in a while, but I don't know those enough. I didn't study that style enough to say, okay, I'm gonna teach that to you. It's not my job to teach it. But as a higher level group, that we can say, okay, after practice, who would like to try some of those knee drops that we worked on in class, and we can work on them together. And we can say, here's how I felt, and here's how I thought it. But me teaching the open big knee drop down to all of the students, when I've only experienced that style from that perspective, I don't know if that's a good use of their time and our time. But also, like you said, less on maybe in a black belt class or a higher level class or after class when we have open mat and we want to do some extra akimi. Let's try some of those. We know the safety things that we need to do, but let's try those. I think that's a good middle ground of how to do some of that stuff, right? And I guess that's the whole point of this is like, how do we integrate and how do we learn new styles of Aikido and bring that, or not necessarily styles of Aikido, but how do we bring some of those big lessons we've learned from different dojos or from different styles into what we do, I guess that's a good little subtopic, and we could keep it really short, but learning Aikido from videos, like, right? How do we, as a higher level person, as we've been doing this for a long time, 10 plus years for all of us, right? Or 20 plus years, right? So, can you learn from a video? And I think there's things that you can catch from it, right? Less on, like you were talking about the series you have online, and those, there's some really cool things that you can kind of catch, right? But there's some things that's not our style that might go by us because you're like, you can't see the angle, or you can't see what they're doing with their hands, or
it's kind of like I said, that Gen Aikido from Humble Dojo. It's kind of interesting because it's all in Japanese to start with, so I have no idea what they're saying most of the time, other than the greetings and the ending. Yeah,
Korewa Pendes.
And so I mean, I like it, but you have to really you have to watch what they're doing, right? And then you have to I mean, the one that does it right now is that Yoko Omomato, and just the intensity in her hands. So I'm assuming that's what she's implying, is off the line intensity in the movement along with your hips, and then the follow through. So but yeah, so that's kind of interesting because I don't speak Japanese, obviously, and so there's no subtitles. So when you're trying to learn that, you can't learn the language. I mean, you could learn the language, but you're really watching what they're doing. And I think sometimes people are talking, right? Then they're not really watching the technique, and vice versa. So this is kind of interesting because I have no idea what you're saying, because it's kind of like, when we did some Japanese and you played those tapes. And we said, yeah, we can't understand that person. And then Mina-san came down and she sounded just like the tapes.
See, it's the same. And they're like, yes, that's the point.
This
I
is
can't
not
understand.
helpful.
Mm-hmm.
So it's kind of the same thing with those. So, I mean, I think you can learn stuff, obviously from videos, but the old saying is, I can give you a video on swimming and you go home and I said, did you watch all those videos? Oh yes, I've watched them throughout the whole week. And then I shove you in the deep end and you drowned. And it's
Right.
like, well, you watched all the videos, didn't you? So, some people think that just watching the videos and coming on the mat, means that you can do the techniques, and you have to be on the mat. I mean, you really do.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and
Yeah.
I don't know. I don't know if you remember, Les Sensei, when we did a demo at somebody you knew a while back, and there was somebody in the audience that you knew, and he came up to us and he's like, "Oh, I'm a martial artist too," and I'm like, "Oh, really? That's great." And he was like, "I learned staff skills from this video series," and I was like, "Oh, that's great. Do you now find a dojo or find a school that you go to and train?" He goes, "No, I just learn all by myself." And he shows a few moves, and like that's what you're saying is jumping in the pool. Like, and again, it was a nice kid and nice thing,
Mm-hmm.
but I think that you hit the point, Leson. But somebody who's never swam before watching swimming things, and then you jump them in the pool, and that's kind of also the danger of learning martial arts. And you go and somebody attacks you, and you're like, I learned this from thing. And the other side of a swimmer that's been swimming 20, 30 years that goes watch that stuff, they might not be able to see exactly what's going on, but they probably can pick up more from those videos. And like I said, that's why you can pick up more from those videos. And that's why I think the biggest context here is that I think the biggest thread for me of learning different styles is somewhat you need to have a base of a style, and you need to have a place that has some consistency and a foundation.
Mm-hmm.
And that's why we say traditional Aikido for us. Like we have traditional foundations of our style, our attacks, our okemi, our weapons, all the stuff is the base,
Warm-ups.
a warm up. And then
Mm-hmm.
from there, we can explore from there after that. But those are in the edges of what we're learning. And, but I think that's kind of a thought for all of us to kind of go through. And I want to add to, and I want to get Kara's thought on all this too, as well, is that, my thought is like when I went to Japan and went to Iwama, right? I spoke Japanese fairly good, but it was a different area of Japan. I was probably nervous, right? Saito Sensei is teaching, right? And they teach a certain way and they say things in a certain way. But the Japanese really didn't matter. Like, it doesn't really matter.
Mm-hmm.
I'm sure he was telling me I was terrible and I was not doing it right. But I heard the word dame a lot, right? So you know what that means. That means bad, right? So, but on the other side of it is it's my job to say, okay, and this is what I try to teach all of us and try to do for myself. If I would see, what is the footwork that they're doing? Are they coming off the line? Is it coming off and bringing the front foot in? Are they coming off and opening? Right? Okay, now I see them footwork, right? Now from here, what is their hands doing? What's the timing? Is it Ato no sen or Sen no sen? Or are they coming off a line to the inside, Tomoto side, or Futokoro side, or outside, And then what are they doing with the hand? And where's the hand on the elbow? And all that, like, if you can break that down, and it takes a long time for all of us to learn those skills, but like you said, Les Sensei, like, I think that's the beauty of and the benefit of at our level being able to watch going to seminars or learning from videos or
Mm-hmm.
is that that's a skill that we can learn of how to, in the old days, the masters in Japan, they used to say, well, we never used to show our okuden, okuden, our secret techniques, because a master could see that at one time and
Mm-hmm.
pick up exactly what those techniques are, right? And so
Right.
I think that is a skill as we learn, and I think that's a skill that over time you can pick up as a aikidoist. But there's a big thread here, Cara. What do you think about all this?
Yeah. All this that I really strongly believe that having a foundation, especially for newer students or beginner students, having that consistency of this is how we do things, so they can build that into their muscle memory, their body awareness, their stuff. I think that's really important. I can't imagine going to a dojo where I have 5 different teachers and they all teach a different style, and I'm just trying to learn Ikkyo. But they're all different. I think that would blow my brain. I know it would. So I'm grateful for having a foundational knowledge of what we do. And then, as you both said, the more hours you get, the more awareness and into your body it becomes, then you can see those finer points, and you can see like, oh, they moved off the line a little different. Like, oh, and you start to build that awareness. But I really believe that, especially for beginner students, having that foundational knowledge, like vocabulary in Spanish or Japanese, this is always the way it is. I think that just serves everybody really well on their journey, to have that to ground with it at the beginning.
Yeah, good points. Good points, Karen. I guess, we've been talking a while, and I think we hit all the. There's another subtopic we were going to talk about, but we hit it. We talked about it, about how do we change and adopt these based off of the where we are on the path. If we're a beginner, how do we do that? And then as we're at a more advanced or a black belt level or more advanced level, like how do we take that in? And that swimming kind of analogy was kind of a good example, that if you can't watch swimming videos and jump in the pool, or get thrown in the pool, right? But as over time we can good exposure too. But like I said, as a beginner, if you go to a seminar, I think there's benefit to that, right? And you learn, but it's not going to be that you take those techniques back home. It's that you got to experience other people's movements. Right. How do they do kemi? How do they fall? How to do it? And like you said, a lot of times it's overwhelming, but that's a good thing, that it trains our brain that life is, especially Aikido, it's that there has to be some things we can learn from this stuff, right? This Aikido from different people.
Yeah. One thing. Yeah. One thing aligned with that, the seminar I went to a few weeks ago, a couple months ago, with the 4 instructors, I heard in the corner when another teacher was teaching that one of his students was like, "But sensei, nobody's doing it like you're showing." Like, and they were very upset about that. Like, and I know exactly what they were talking about. And for me, it really reinforced that when we as Aikido students are in a seminar, to do our very best to do what that teacher is showing us, and not revert because I'm more comfortable doing it this way, so I'm going to do it this way because this is what I'm good at, and not put myself out there to try and be wrong, but really, do our best to do what they're showing us, to just expand that brain a little bit, and also respect and honor that teacher for showing us something different. Because I think that's a risk in going to seminars, that a lot of people go, they show up, but they're still doing their semi-Aikido. They're not really learning. They're not like you said, Leson, a lot of people don't stick around very long because the brain starts just exploding with the newness.
Yeah. I would say devil's advocate side, though, sometimes they're showing techniques that could be fairly complex, and that if you don't show us, if you don't go back one step backwards and show us some of the fundamental movements you're doing, and you're doing this big thing, we have to we stop moving and get hit, right? We never do that. Or sometimes you have to adapt on the stuff that the movements that we were used to. So I would just say, as an instructor, I've learned sometimes it's not because people don't want to do it, it's because they're not able to do it. And then you're like, see, this is a good example of why now we're going to go backwards a little bit, and now we're going to work on that footwork. So we're going to go a little slower. And that kind of, like you said, Leson, like, okay, let's bring it down, because maybe you're teaching too complex of an idea for your style. Right. And we have to go backwards a little bit to those movements. Were you about to say something?
Well, I was just going to say, back to the beginning, it's just, of the, seminar for Shaw Sensei, it's just the Tomiki style was basic, but nobody could do it other than his students. So you're doing all these different things because when the people weren't doing it correctly, right?
Right.
And the thing is that, you know, comfortability is a disease, right?
Right.
People are always comfortable with their job, they're comfortable with their personal life, they're comfortable with all this other type of stuff, and they never want to push themselves in any way, right? And you know, even if you make mistakes, you should be pushing yourself, right? So I mean, I just find it interesting that when you get up to, I think, a certain level, like, you know, I'm really not a Steven Seagal fan, but I like his movies. But as a sensei, his tests for black belts are basic techniques, and he tells them that. And then when they get up to test, they can't do the basic techniques. Katatedori erimi nage.
Right.
They can't do the basic technique. But what can they do? All the cool looking stuff,
Right.
right? They can smash people, but when it comes to the basic technique,
Right.
they're not very good at it. And that's his whole point, is that even though you're a black belt, you are a beginner now. You should be working on kihon. You should be working on basic techniques, not always the big fluffy stuff.
Yeah. And if you know, and that I one of my videos we were doing, you know, we're talking about, you know, Aikikai testing, and if you actually look at the test requirements, you know, for example, Ikkyo, Shomenuchi Ikkyo is in every single one. You know, and so why is Shomenuchi Ikkyo in every single one? And that's that concept of that it should be progressing and you should be getting better at it every single time, but we still need to be able to show all of the previous exercises, and that's a good example of, you know, body movement, you know, timing, all that stuff together. And like you said, how do you do that along with adding some of that? But I think like from my perspective, when we see a black belt level, if you do amazing basic techniques, very strong, that's a great example, right? If you see somebody who flutters through fancy stuff and then you really can't see what they're doing and they don't have strong footwork and handwork and movements and off balance and all that kind of stuff, you're like, okay, you know, maybe they need to work on that a little bit. And like you said, foundation is everything, right?
Yeah, definitely.
I think to kind of maybe to wrap this up and to get everybody's kind of thoughts is like, I think the world today is, yeah, Leson hit it earlier, a good thing that there's a lot of different people, different styles, different experiences, different senseis they've worked with, and so there's so many different Aikido styles out there, and so many different perspectives and ideas in a world today. From our perspective, how do we all both learn from each other in Aikido, and also be part of enabling open-mindedness and also having a foundation of our own. I think that's kind of that balance, right? But build that community and build more experiences, positive experiences of, like you said, Les Son earlier, about kind of exposing people to outside of their comfort zone, right? And also that we're learning something, and like Kara mentioned earlier, like, you know, martialness, and at the seminar in Las Vegas with Sam Brandon Sensei and Hendrik Sensei, right? So how do we take all that in, and what's some final thoughts on how the world can, you know, from our perspective, can move forward and take all this in a positive way? Anyone want to go first?
Well, if we had that answer, we wouldn't be sitting here. No, I'm just kidding. Fire everybody.
The answer is 43, right?
43, 27. Yes. Yeah, I'm going to use two Aikido terms, and that's blend and flow. And, you know, expose ourselves to different techniques and teachers, and just take what we can from those, not change our foundational stuff, but be open-minded that we're all practicing Aikido. I've practiced not as much around the world as I'd like to, but I practice in different countries and don't understand that language. But the thing I love about it is that we're all speaking the same language of Aikido, and they're doing very different things and talking different language, but I'm still understanding, like, oh, they're doing this. Okay, I get that. I'm going to develop that into my practice. So, yeah, blending and flowing with different styles and respecting their path and not letting it detract us from our main path, but adding that in as a different spice to the soup or something like that. And just keeping an open mind, and I think enjoying the journey is the biggest thing.
Yeah, great thought. That's it.
Well, I mean, it's a little bit off what we're talking about, but I think that the senseis or anybody that's teaching has to lead by example. So you have to have uniform. You can't go off in different directions and stuff like that. Especially if you're trying to teach what we're trying to learn, which is the Aikido way. And so there is a foundation.
What kind of uniform did you say? You.
That's okay. Just be uniformed in the way you teach.
Oh yeah, okay.
There's some senseis that go off in the deep end about this and that, and but I think we also have to just teach the way we teach. I think sometimes we try to adapt to the student, which is good, but sometimes we bend down too much to the student of not showing zanshin. Like I said, our style is not the ultimate rough, right? But it's also not down here either. It's kind of in the middle or towards this way a little bit more. And sometimes as I feel that we try to adapt to the student, and of course students are important because if you don't have students, you can't do Aikido. So I think sometimes we just need to stay true to what we're trying to teach.
You're saying we as an Aikido sometimes see that.
Yeah. As a dojo, we need to kind of stay that way, because I've never seen any other dojos that kind of change their techniques and stuff like that. So I just think that sometimes we, as a group, as everybody, we try to slow things down to a point where is it really Aikido anymore? And I think we need to stay with that.
What do you mean by slow things down?
Really show everything, every movement, and continually stop the student and tell them, hey, your foot's not right. This isn't right, and stuff like that. Instead of sometimes you just got to feel it, right? You just got to boom, take the person and throw them off their feet, and they do the same thing. So, I think that we need to just continue to stay how we teach and how our dojo is traditional, if you will, because that's a huge word, right? We could talk about that for hours about what is traditional, right? Realistically, when you say traditional, O-sensei was traditional. Well, nobody can stay in the traditional way of the way he taught, but that's because we continue to grow, right? You see all these other
evolve,
all these other senseis take a different path, which is good for Aikido, I think.
Right. So. Yeah, I think a really interesting point you made is that I kind of take in is that a lot of people say this is the way it is and this is the way O-sensei taught and all that stuff, and then you say, okay, I've seen you in 1990 and I've seen you in 2000, I've seen you in 2010, and then I've seen you in 2020, and they're still doing very similar techniques, but they have evolved some of it, right? We all do, right? Like we all have insights into our own Aikido, and we're like, wow, that really works well, and that now I see why. I remember my sensei yelled at me in this seminar back in 1982 or whatever, and they were doing this, and now I understood what they were saying, and then I need to adjust, and now it works better because I've had insights, and so, but that doesn't mean you change the whole system. You change that you say, okay, we're really working on this or this footwork and this step, and I think you had made a good point about evolving, and that we can take in, and that's my final point on this is that how I learn from these seminars and these teachers is that after 37 years or something, I think, okay, I'm going to keep an open mind. Kara, you were talking about that and blending, all that kind of stuff, and then you say, okay, I have to be able to again, seminars, you don't learn their fundamentals. You're learning their more advanced stuff usually that people are showing, and so I have to quickly get as much of that as I can in from their footwork, their handwork, their off balance, their turn. And a lot of times that's a lot to take in for something that you don't know.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And then, but then if you can work with their higher level students, or you can work with them, you can feel more from their okemi and from their throws. And then you can say, okay, there's one or two little things. What can I pull in today? What did I pull from this whole thing? I'm not going to mimic that
Yeah.
style, but
Mm-hmm.
I really liked, I remember a fun thought when we went to Aikikai and we were all training in Aikikai, and I was working with this small lady, and we were doing Ryotedori Tenchinage, and she was so low to the ground, and her bottom hand was so like strong, like it was so like locked into the bottom, and I'm like, and usually like bigger people focus on this side, and I always, both sides are important, but then you feel like, wow, there's so much. I'm not going to learn how she did that, but I'm like, how do I connect more with that lower by hand to my body?
Mm-hmm.
Like, how do I get that there? And I was like, wow, that was a really cool feeling. Of course it's nice being 3 feet smaller than them, but that they can do that. But how do I do that at my size
Right.
as well? Like, so I took that and says, okay, when I'm doing Tenchinage, this is important and this is important and turning and looking, but this is important. The bottom hand is important too. And how do we, and of course I didn't change how I do Tenchinage, but I've changed how I've tried to work on these things. So every seminar, I think we can pick up one or two little things that we can really say, hey, Leson or Karasan, can we work on this thing and let's practice on this thing we learned, and we can explore, and then how do you weave it into your own Aikido a little bit. So that's kind of my thought on all of this, and blending and getting together, like you said, Les, and say like finding more opportunities we can, as much as we can in our busy lifestyles, to visit and encourage other people to come visit us, right? Everybody's welcome to come to Kira Aikido, come train with us. We're always open to have other people come train with us. But like you said, we do it the way we do it when we're teaching, and you can do it slower. And I remember when we were at Nippon Con, and the basic in the beginners classes, and sometimes they're teaching the beginners different techniques than we're teaching in general class, because like Shionaga, and they would go underneath, and they're like, well, it's easier for them to do that. I'm like, yeah, but then they get in general class and nobody knows what they're doing. So just go slower and do it the right way. If you teach them the right way, we don't want to retrain people, right? Like, and like you said, Leslie, you can't go fast on a hard Shionaga, and then you're not going to have any people go from the beginner's class.
Right.
That's why it's so hard. It's so important for the beginner students that in that time we had the beginners only classes, right? And those beginner students really get a strong, slow foundation, how to do a roll, how to fall, how to move those really basic exercises in the way that we're going to do that in general class.
Right.
And then general class, we should be doing it the same way we're doing it in advanced class, right? On our weapons class. There should be no differentiation,
Right.
that confuses people. It's just at a higher level. So
Right.
sorry.
Yeah, it's really
Got a
taking
little
those key home. Yeah.
I get off my soapbox.
Yeah. But I think that's a really good point for all of this, is that have really strong kihon foundational techniques, and then over the years those are going to evolve and you're going to get deeper in those, but that kihon strong grounded technique that's what's going to make all the difference in that journey.
All right. So I think there's hope, and those final notes that Les Sensei said about this is a good thing. There is good that there's lots of different styles out there, and I agree that's a good thing. And it's good that we also have found a traditional foundation of our Aikido, and we need to be consistent with our students. So I think we got a lot of good talks out here. So to end today's podcast, learning different styles in Aikido is important, and it's also important to have your own foundation style, and but also there's a lot of opportunity and benefits to work, and look at any pitfalls, and it's all about balance. So thank you, Les Sensei and Car Sensei, for joining us today. And thank you all for coming and listening to the Heart of the Dojo podcast. So we will be back again. And if there's any other topics that you'd like to discuss, we'd love to hear from that in the comments. And we'll be back soon. Thank you, everyone.
Thanks, everybody.